2, 1, and we are recording episode 359 with Mr. Michael Swanson, author of War State, which I always knew about the military-industrial complex. And obviously, anyone with a pulse has should at least have paid attention to Eisenhower's speech and heard it before. But the overwhelming power of it and the influence it has over both, or I guess, I would say most importantly, the Soviet Union and the United States, to where, it wasn't really until the last year or so that I had learned of Kennedy's fear of a military coup during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'd always heard, the is Khrushchev really in charge? But it wasn't until learning about Kennedy's own fear of military coup, especially in the book about James Jesus Angleton called Ghost, and both of these, it's starting to sort of paint an image now of both of these heads. Were they really in charge? I know I've been talking for 90 seconds straight and I haven't let you say a word, so how about you introduce yourself, sir?
Yeah, no, I'm curious to, but as you said, my name is Mike Swanson. I wrote this book, The War State, which you're talking about. And it's about the military-industrial complex and the rise of America as a global superpower after World War II. And my dad, he was in the service for 20 years as a colonel, and he worked in the Pentagon for a short amount of time. As a child, when I was real young, I lived on a few military bases.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was in World War II. And when I wrote this book, one of the things I was thinking about in the back of my mind was both my parents were born in the 40s. At the moment, as the World War II was ending and the Cold War was beginning, when all this was really starting, this type of history, when it comes to America becoming a global superpower, this military-industrial complex, and so forth. The Kennedy as president, those events that you mentioned, the Cuban Missile Crisis and his worries there, they were at the height of the Cold War. So it was a unique moment. In fact, the most dangerous moments perhaps in all of human history, the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I was thinking that I'm, as being a child of my parents and a grandchild of my grandfather, that perhaps in my lifetime, this system that started back then may come to an end or change. But, I don't, not necessarily saying that's happening now. I wrote this 10 years ago. So, but that was one of the things I was thinking, the perspective of time. And now, so many people, if you're under 20, you have no memory of 9/11 in the Iraq war and Afghanistan war that started those wars. Those were big events in my lifetime. So is 9/11, and the Cuban Missile Crisis goes back even farther than that. So these are all events that have built up, underpin the current moment that we're in.
I remember. Have you ever listened to any Dan Carlin, Hardcore History?
No. What's his take on this?
He's I heard him recommend, years ago through Joe Rogan, and I finally listened to some of his work. He has a great series about World War I called Blueprints for Armageddon. But I do remember listening to him on Joe Rogan a couple of years ago, and they actually brought him in to the Pentagon right before the invasion of Iraq. And he was all flattered because he was like, oh, they're bringing in a historian. They want to know about the history. And he says in hindsight, he was like, I think it was more so just like now they could like technically say they brought in a historian for like cultural importance. So when we go bulldoze everything, we can be like, well, but that's not the point. The point is he was sitting there listening to like Mattis talking to, obviously he wasn't SecDef then, but he still a general, and he was talking to, I mean, it might have been Petraeus, it might have been Robert Gates at the time, Secretary of Defense under George Bush. And he said the first part of like the meeting was just, what would it, what would it be? What would the invasion be like? And this wasn't any like top secret thing. This was like being openly discussed. But he said he always remembers like the second part of the discussion. And they started talking about like, well, what will we do? Like, how will we like arm our allies around them? What companies will we use to provide them with tanks, armored personnel vehicles, jets? What are the supply lines for the pieces to repair those jets? And he was like, I was listening to like, true to form, like the military industrial complex. Like, all right, who's gonna outfit this, right? It's like, we're gonna put on a concert. It's like, all right, well, who's getting the contract? Coca-Cola is gonna provide the refreshments. McDonald's is gonna. And he was like, and I was watching and I'm thinking about that recently, and I'm with you in your book, which everyone listening, one of my new favorite books. I say that with almost every author, and I mean it, but it truly is. And I'll put it in the description, sticky in the top comment. It's a great Audible listen. But I've been thinking of it more, and I'm with you in that generally I think, for lack of a better term, the whole thing's kind of fucked and evil. But for the sake of argument, I'll try to look at it in a positive light. I was thinking, is this just it's a bit of a stretch. Is this just a tactic? Is this a new warfare tactic, in that the way to, you could argue, did we beat the Soviets not with military might, but by going to the moon and then making them drain their bank accounts trying to do it? Is a new tactic to provide weapons to the world that you create the replacement pieces for. If at any point one of those nations turns on you, you cut off the supply line. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just trying to think of it from the minds of the power elite. Do you think that's and this is obviously all speculation. There's no right or wrong answer. Do you think there's any viability to that?
Well, when the Cold War started, it was primarily the United States and the Soviet in the 50s. It was the United States and the Soviet Union that were competing with each other, not just in Europe, but throughout the entire world, um, to control the so-called third world, to have influence in these countries. So, for example, in Africa, there there are a couple countries that would say, "Okay, America, we want you to help us build a dam or sell us some weapons or something," and then they would also say the same thing to the
To the
Soviet Union
Soviets. Yeah.
and play the sides off one another. And now we have China in this game too.
Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah, with their Belt and Road Initiative, exactly. So the thing is, it's not just that the United States can, sell the people the weapons and then make them weapons turn off or not sell them anymore. You can do this with currency, with a debt also.
Mm-hmm.
The global bank can lend countries money and then stop lending them money and put them in financial hardship. In fact, this has happened. It happened. We tried to do that in Cuba against Castro. We did it in Chile in the 1970s. But today, it's becoming harder to do this sort of thing because China and Russia are in the United are more economically powerful, particularly China, than they were decades previous. So there's competition now that wasn't there. We're not really in a world where the United States can really successfully dictate things
Mm-hmm.
like we could have in the past. And the failures in Iraq and the Middle East, I believe, are an example of that. But so is we try to put sanctions on Russia. We've done it in Iran. We're doing it in what's the country, Bolivia, and the one Chavez is in, um,
Venezuela.
Venezuela. Yeah, yeah, and so forth. And what one of the things this is doing is making these countries work together.
Yeah.
Find other ways to do international trade. So it's harder and harder for us to manage this unilaterally as it was. So I think that and this is probably just going to continue this
Mm-hmm.
sort of trend where it really won't be the U.S. so powerful, but China is rising and so forth.
Do you think that we are on the way, if it hasn't already begun, to a Cold War II with
Well,
China?
there's definitely signs of it. I mean, obviously, the Trump administration, he
Mm-hmm.
talked about, he raised tariffs. eh, He raised tariffs against China, basically had a trade war, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And now, at the very beginning of the Biden administration, he gave a speech uh, basically saying that China is a strategic threat. Just this morning, there was a story saying that the Navy had run a couple ships through the South
South
China
China
Sea.
Sea.
Yeah, that was this morning. So there, you could see evidence
I
that.
didn't. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Yeah, yeah. I
Oh
just saw the
shit!
headline.
Oh
Uh,
no!
so, but these things have happened. This has been a story that appears every once in a while. But since the Cold War ended, there were this is long forgotten, but there was a period of time before we had the first Gulf War for about 2 years there, where it wasn't certain what the future of the military industrial complex would be. Did we need it? Uh, the budget was cut a little bit when Clinton came in, actually, but there wasn't a clear strategic objective anymore once the Berlin Wall fell. Who's our new enemy? And there was some ideas floated as potential things to do. One of them was let's have drug wars. There's all these drug kingpins in Colombia, and we can make this a big thing to do now. And that kind of faded away though once the first Gulf War happened, and then that kind of drifted. That once that war ended, there was a drift. Clinton got in office. Uh, as I said, the budget was cut. Then 9/11 came, so the fighting terrorism became the thing to center national strategic policy on, and the military industrial complex and all that
Mhm.
stuff. And then that kind of started to go by the wayside. And now, uh, when Trump was president, uh, his national security advisor McMaster, when he was still there, he issued a document on behalf of the Trump administration detailing that what should our policies be about, and he listed strategic competition by nation states, China, Russia primarily, as the main things to focus on. So, is that a new Cold War? I mean, there's Cold War language around it, but I don't think we can go. I don't think we're going to go back to the height of the Cold War, the way that was, where we've had very little trade of the Soviet Union. Very few Americans went over there, vice versa, and it really defined everything in society in the 50s and early 60s. I don't think we're going to go to that situation. More like a tension, I
Mhm.
think, and I certainly hope it doesn't get worse. And it's unclear to me that we really have a policy that will lead to victory or success, whatever, however that's defined, because it seems as to me at least that the trade war hasn't been successful. China's trade has increased, ours has shrunk over the past couple of years. I'm not trying to cast blame
Sure.
on anyone for that. And so far, the Biden administration, in its speech given and a little action today or yesterday, I read about this morning. They're focused on military. The military, you're building weapons. The Navy wants more ships, and I don't know if that's going to do anything. I think the competition is an economic competition, and that's one that um, you got to compete in the marketplace, and in a more free market is my view, with better products
Hmm.
and so forth, and tariffs I don't think necessarily accomplish that, and just making more Navy boats, yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to do much either to me. In fact, I got it downstairs somewhere. There's a real interesting book I read a couple months ago. I can't remember the title of it, but it was written by a guy that was George Bush's an assistant national security advisor in his administration, whose job was to make policy about China, Japan, the whole East Asia, and is a history of how we dealt with these areas of the world. And he was saying that historically, the U.S. would focus either on Japan or China as an ally to kind of balance the other one out. And then, but we had always had a notion that we never wanted to have a land war in China
Mhm.
or against Asia because they just have so many people.
Yeah.
And every time we did it in Korea, we had a stalemate. And in Vietnam, I would argue we didn't win; we lost.
Mhm.
The North Vietnamese, you know, they won. They're still there. We're not.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with these places of the world? And um, it seems like historically the best policy has been some sort of trade and then play the countries off of each other in a balance of power, which is what England did in Europe before World War One. So that's what I would advocate, but I'm not the one in charge. And there's a lot of vested interest in producing these naval boats. You get more admirals to command them, and it does provide jobs. And if you combine the people in the military and the people working to make the military products, you got the highest, the number one employer in the country. Walmart is second. So
Man, that just got me thinking. It's like it's like I love conspiracy theories, and I've said that to anyone that's ever listened to this podcast. I don't believe them. Most of them I don't. I just appreciate them for, instead of Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, right? That's fiction. And then, reality is stranger than fiction. I always look at conspiracies as spiced up reality. So it's the ultimate stranger than fiction. That being said, just now thinking, it just seeded the thought in my mind is, so like the conspiracy of like COVID, right? It's an asymmetrical weapon from China, but not even that. The whole idea behind like the Great Reset is that it's this thing that's supposed to wipe out all like Main Street business and thus force us all to work for one of the mega corporations or be dependent on government stimulus checks. Sort of force your where you get your how you put dinner on the table. But I was thinking, like, what if it's by design that we're destroying Main Street America so that the only way we move forward is to build an army. The only thing that America can do profitably is to invade, and thus we are now all intrinsic. Because it used to be, right, you had to have a Gulf of Tonkin or a 9/11 to go rile up the nation. What if you screw everyone out of a job to the point where we're all dependent on defense contractors, and it's just like, hey, now we're all foaming at the mouth to invade? That's far out there. I just made it up as I as I went along, but man, it doesn't it it's definitely, well, this one analogy I always use is this, is like, so I've had on guys on this podcast from Delta Force who I've become friends with. If I took out, let's say it's, I took out a big loan from a loan shark down the street or something, right? And he's got his goons, whatever, small town criminal. And I take out $100,000 from him, and it's at a 90% interest rate, and I have a month to pay it back. If I use that $100,000 to hire these Delta Force guys who are better than anyone in the world, how is that loan shark going to send his muscle men to collect his $100,000? Where's my money? I spent it on these Delta Force guys. Well, I'm going to make you pay now. Oh, are you? Like, I have this tier one team around me. And you mentioned at the end of your book the spiraling debt. And I began, one thing I've been thinking for a while, and I've talked about it before on this podcast, is who, if we're $27 trillion in debt, who's going to collect it when we have, where's the money? Oh, sorry, we used it building all these aircraft carriers, nuclear bombers, satellites, a space force. Well, we're going to collect our debt. You and what army? Is is our debt, is there never, do you think there's perhaps no, I don't know where I'm going with all this. I'm going off the rails. Do you think that's by design? Is it's like that saying, if I owe you $1 million, I'm screwed. If I owe you $1 billion, I'm screwed. Do you think there's any logic to that? Who's going to collect the debt?
Well, um, right now, I mean, the debt's gotten so big that the government, the Federal Reserve, the government itself, is actually now printing money to finance a lot of it itself. So they're not going to collect it, right? Because they're just buying their own debt, right? You know, 15 about 15 years ago, China was financing half of it, and they still hold a lot of that debt that they bought, but they pared back their purchases because the debt got so big. They don't even have the money to finance all of it. It was 500 billion around
Oh, Jesus.
like
Oh, no.
over 10 years ago it's 500 billion. Now
Oh,
it's I don't
no.
even know what it is.
27 trillion.
Well, I mean, the deficit. I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
the deficit was 500 billion
Okay.
before 2008, and now it's. I know it's over a trillion, maybe 2 trillion now. I've lost track because of everything going on. They keep
Yeah.
putting more spending bills, right?
Yeah.
So China doesn't have enough money to finance that, so the government's financing it. It's been doing it for several years now, and they're not going to collect on themselves. So the real danger isn't that someone's going to say, I want all the money that you owe us. It's that they're going to say, you're never going to pay us. You can't. It's gotten so big. So you're making our debt worth less than it was when we bought it. So it falls in value, and then the dollar goes in value on the global market, you know, because it trades internationally. There's a foreign exchange rate for the yuan, the yen, and
Mhm.
the Swiss franc, and all these currencies, and they're slowly going up in value against the U.S. dollar. So that's the real danger, is that the dollar continues to go down, and against these other currencies. And if it's slow enough, you would never even notice it.
Yeah.
But if it's sped up, then it would cause inflation and problems like that.
Yeah. And again, it's, but who has like the big stick? And this is not entirely, it's not what I believe, but it's kind of a thought experiment I've been playing with myself is, again, what if I can print money and I'm in this cul-de-sac of houses and I know that, there are hard, like, societies can collapse. Let's just say that this cul-de-sac exists in a vacuum. There's no other world outside of it. I'm going to start going to these neighboring houses and being like, how much do you want for that case of water in your garage? Oh, it was $5 at Walmart. I'll give you 10. Okay. And I'm going to start doing this and doing this and doing this. I'm going to buy up all of their stuff. I'm going to buy all of their ammo. I'm going to start putting, metal walls in. I'm going to build a garrison. By the time they start to go, man, you're just throwing thousands of dollars at us for like every battery and band-aid, and I don't, your money is not that valuable anymore. Well, once they've all realized that it's a charade, at that moment I've already amassed all of the weapons. The facade falls, and now I'm like, okay, well, now give it to me. Loaded gun, give it to me. Society's collapsed. I want your food. Is that part of the charade? We're going to keep getting money from these people until finally they say, America, you're not going to pay up. Okay, well, then, like, the mask is going to fall off. And it's like, now we're just going to take it. And again, it's a very dark view of the world. But I mean, in terms of global power, in terms of, the oldest quest of mankind to be in control, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan. I mean, Hitler tried, right? It's the Soviet Union. It's not China and the US. I don't think anything's off the table. And I mean, shit. Eventually, would it not be, we've built the biggest army, and now it's like, and you financed it. So when they say we're not giving you any more money, well, now we just roll in with 10 aircraft carriers. It's I don't know. Or does the rest of the world team up against us? It's the reserve currency. Is it backed by gold? I look at it as like, is it backed by the largest military that's ever existed? I don't know. Part of me thinks that we are on a decline of American power, worse than ever before. Part of me thinks it's stronger than ever before, and I really can't find any gray area in between.
Well, on one hand, the we have thousands of nuclear missiles,
Yeah.
and we have them in. We also have. I don't know off the top of my head how many of these are in submarines
Mm-hmm.
under the ocean that really
Invulnerable.
that are pretty much invulnerable. In China, from what I understand, doesn't have but a few nuclear missiles that can even reach California.
Yeah.
The Soviets do, obviously. I mean, the Russians.
Yeah. The Soviet.
The Russians, obviously,
Yeah.
left over from when they were the Soviets. So there's they could hit us, but the Chinese really can't. But how do you win? To win a war where we say, okay, we're not going to pay you, we're going to invade you. I don't think we no one's won a war like that since World War II.
Yeah.
Really. So I don't even know if wars like that can even be fought. Because even in Iraq, when we invaded Iraq, we won. But what did we win? That's the
Yeah.
problem. If you
Yeah.
do invade someone and you win, what do you really win? You win turmoil and people
Yeah.
they're going to be guerrillas on you, and so we really can't just take what we want from the rest of the world. More likely, if there was a scenario where we're just not going to pay, it wouldn't be that the U.S. then launches wars on everyone, but everyone else would just say, okay, we're not going to give you nothing then,
Mm-hmm.
and people would just retreat.
Yeah.
Nations would just retreat inward into themselves, or you'd have like regional trade, and then after that, you'd probably have regional like trading blocks form and so
Yeah. Yeah. Or is it we stop defending international shipping lanes? And it's like, are you sure you want to stop trading with us? Is whatever it is, I don't think anything's off the table. And just like you talk about the entrenched power structure that is really pretty indifferent to whoever's in office, right? They're going to do whatever they're going to do. The military industrial complex it's a beast that moves along. It seems like the idea that money is going to take it down. I almost imagine these guys in the big war room, like Doctor Strangelove, and they're just laughing because it's like, look at Tommy and Mike. And they're worried about the American dollar, and they're like, they don't understand raw power, like real politic. Part of me thinks is like you have these generals just like 27. That means nothing. Real power is an Abrams tank or a B-2 bomber. It's Space Force. It's the NSA. I don't know. It's regardless. It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying, and it's one thing. And I had to bring this up. Every once in a while, I find like something new in each book I read that really sticks out to me. Most recently is a book called Original Gangsters, and it's about NWA and Straight Outta Compton. The fun fact I got from that was that George H.W. Bush actually lived in Compton for 2 years,
oh really
Right after World War II. Yeah, President Bush,
okay
because all
okay
the soldiers came back from the Pacific and they were defense
ah
contractors, and it was easy.
California was booming.
Yep. GI
LA
Bills.
was booming.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. So George H.W. Bush lived in Compton.
that's funny.
Yeah. Another one is from Norman Ohler, the author of Blitzed. Hitler used to do. He would go up to one of his castles in the mountains with Ava Braun, and he would do. He would take Eucadol, which is like Vicodin, and he would do impressions of World War One machine guns to Ava Braun. Which, if you actually stop and think about it, that means Hitler, high on painkillers, was doing, which to me is just the most absurd image ever. With your book, is you have Kennedy, and I knew all about the whiz kids, and they're trying to break it down into, they bring in McNamara from Ford, and it's all about, can we sort of workshop all of these problems? Whether or not it worked is, I guess, still up for debate. But it's him talking to someone on Air Force One, and he's pointing to somebody who's asleep, one of his aides, secretaries, and saying, "You see Bob over there? If I woke up Bob and told him to jump out of the plane for me, he'd do it. Like, that's loyalty." And okay, whatever. But then the next line, say all of this to build up to this. If I chopped off, or if I sawed off Jackie's head and brought it into the Oval Office, one of my secretaries would go get a box and not even ask a question. That's the weirdest thing I think I've ever heard about Kennedy. I was like, it's this handsome playboy. It's all about, peace, not just in our time, but all time, not just for Americans, but for all men. I am a Berliner. Ich bin ein Berliner. If I sawed off Jackie's head, it was like, what the hell? Like, play that back. What the hell did you just say? I've just been thinking about that. Like, who that? What? It's just the oddest. Like, geez, man. Like, take it down a step. If I sawed off Jackie's head. Sorry, there's really no purpose to that. I just had to
No,
bring
no,
it up.
it's funny. I forgot all about that. I mean, I wrote that over 10 years ago. So I know now. I remember it.
Yeah.
It's funny, but that's what. Yeah, when I write these things, I try to find.
Yeah.
I'll read something. I read that somewhere, and I was like, "Well, that's funny."
Yeah.
How can you forget that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's always things like, quotes I've heard before. It's in your book. I've heard it in like several Cold War
Yeah,
books, Curtis LeMay talking to Kennedy, "You're in a
yeah,
real fix right now. What did you
right,
just say?"
right.
I've heard that in books. I've never heard that about JFK talking about Jackie. And I was like, what the hell? I thought that was hilarious. But oh shit, what was I gonna say? I just lost my train of thought. But so where do you see it eventually going? And I've only got you for a couple more minutes. Where do you see it? What are your predictions for? Is the American empire in decline? Are we gonna fight China? Is there any hope to get out of the military industrial complex? Is this just the natural system? If you ran the simulation of Earth a million times, would you find that it eventually runs to like two power centers based upon war? Is Do you have any insight on, any opinion on it, on to where it's going?
Well, there's a book I didn't quote it in here. It's called Report from Iron Mountain. It's written it's actually a parody, but it was written in, I think, 65. And it basically says, if we did away with, it makes the argument that we need the military industrial complex for the economy, and because without it, the United States would have no purpose. So, so the only way we could get rid of it is if we had an alternative purpose for everyone to rally around. And one could argue that's just how human society has been ever since it started, right?
I think you're right.
So I think that's a big component of it. And I don't think it's going to collapse or go away. I do think it could get smaller than it is right now. We could pull back or retrench a little bit. I mean, in a certain way, that's happened. And from when Obama came in office, there was a drawdown in the number of people that were in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Trump tried to continue that in Afghanistan. They're still there though. So in a certain sense, there is a little bit of retrenchment. There's fewer people in the military than there was 10 years ago, but the defense budget is not shrunk, it's increasing. So, and that I think is due to economics and the power of the lobbyists and so forth. But that could change, if the country has to cut its budget at some point, and I think it will, then that will just happen. So I don't think China is, I don't think we're gonna have a war with China. Uh, I don't know where the next war will really even be. Honestly, certainly any sort of size. So I think the most likely scenario is that other countries over the next 10 or 20 years will kind of increase in their power relative to ours. Doesn't mean ours has to collapse, but theirs will just increase a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
China, the most obvious example, but I think also the European Union could, you know, increase in power if their economy got straightened out. Britain is sitting there. They used to be the most powerful country in the world, but they're just kind of sitting there.
Just like a token country.
Yeah, yeah, but they used to be where we are,
Yeah.
uh, supposedly. So I think that's more the continuation of what has been going on the last 15 years is probably the most likely thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It it almost I've kind of had my own theory of like it's almost like a backwind. Is that the right word? Tailwind on a
Yeah,
flight. Really strong winds will push you forward faster. But if it's too dangerous, it'll just break apart the plane.
yeah,
I've heard the argument that without the Cold War and space race, right now in 2021 we would be at 2001 technology. So like in the next year or two, we would be getting like the click wheel iPod. But instead, from like trickle down technology, we are where we are. I've been looking at it like, is a Cold War actually humanity's finest invention to create an environment for hyper progress? The downside is if you go too far, it goes hot, and then there's no coming back. You go back to the Stone Age. But if you can keep it cold, humanity makes leaps and bounds forward with from the space race to microelectronics to transistors. Is it actually the most like it's like how we set up like Oak Ridge, Tennessee and Los Alamos, two labs just for competition, healthy competition. They thought would who could make like the smaller hydrogen bomb was basically the argument. Is a Cold War actually like the most, right now we see Elon Musk trying to get to Mars. The single best thing for the space race would be if China landed a man on Mars tomorrow. That would be the single best thing that could happen because we would be like, oh, hell no, we have to do it. Is being at each other's throats actually a way to jump technology forward? It's a dangerous gamble. Is it that, or is no one in charge? Is this perception that someone's in charge and there's a power elite? Is the reality you get up to those upper echelons, you talk to other generals, in the Pentagon, and they're like, dude, no one's running this thing. It's just a shit show. No one knows what's going on. The
well,
president, at
but
least.
both of those things, yeah, everything. I would say probably everything you've just said is true.
Oh,
All of it.
oh
That that
no.
that you do have the elites. You do have this is does create benefits in society. The technologies as you mentioned, and you do have these elites that are there more, but they're not fully in control. However, I do think some of them have tried to control it. That's what I think the Kennedy story is
Okay.
actually about. That he tried to control the Cold War and all these militaristic forces, of lack of a better word, at the height of the Cold War. In McNamara, because I'm now working on Vietnam, I believe that that's what he was trying to do with the Vietnam War, try to control
Mm-hmm.
how much the war would escalate and
Mm-hmm.
manage it and all this kind of stuff, and we end up losing. Um, so I think some of them try to do this sort of thing, um, but I don't think anyone is completely in control. Like they can write a plan out and have it
Yeah.
executed 10 years down the road, but there are going to be conspiracies and things that do happen from time to time. It's just also human nature. I mean, even in a city, I don't know where you live, but there's going to be conspiracies in the sense
Yeah.
of just business people getting together to want to make
Yeah.
a new business,
Yeah.
or street thugs,
Yeah.
someone trying to take control of the drug trade from time to time. Then they'll fall, and someone else will do it, and and then so forth. And you might have crooked courts or lawyers or judges or whatever, or police or who knows what. So these things, it's just the way things are.
Yeah, I've had this idea for a while that whoever's in charge doesn't actually know they're in charge, right? It's like a video game map. If you're out there and you're playing against against the computer, you don't unless you have it so the game tells you, you don't know when you've killed the last enemy. Like you might be walking around the map for
Right.
3 hours before you realize, I don't think there's anyone left. You're like, "Oh, I got everybody." Whoever's in charge might not know they're in charge. It might be so compartmentalized, so many levels of smoke and mirrors, so much betrayal, so much entrenchment that whoever's actually in charge might have no idea they're in charge. Like, you've been running a marathon for so long, you don't know if you're in first. You might be in first, you might be in last.
Right, right.
I think whoever's in charge probably has no idea they're in charge. They're
Yeah,
like
I think
they're like
so.
yeah, they're on the defensive. Little do they know, like, they are at the peak. And there's no way
Mhm.
to know because if you try to confirm with anybody else, that would risk your position.
Right.
It's yeah, it's I don't know, it's just no one's in charge. Maybe that's the whole you get to that level and that's the true terror. You get up there, you go, no one's
Yeah,
running.
yeah,
No one's running this thing. We really are just on a rock flying around a star and it's just chaos. Maybe that's the real conspiracy. I don't know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's something to now you're gonna make me think for a while, I have to think about that thought.
Yeah. Well, I've kept you 10 minutes longer than I said I would. So,
Oh, it's good
Mr.
talking
Mike
with you.
Swanson, thank you so much for coming on. And you've already put out your book about Vietnam, correct?
Yeah, they can find it on Amazon. They just type "Why the Vietnam War?" question mark. It'll come up.
I would I'll send you an email. I'll grab that book. I would love to have
Okay.
you on and chat about
Yeah,
that.
sure.
I let
That'd be fun.
you're a great author, man.
Thank you.
I've said this I say this to authors I have on. I have something like 1100 audiobooks. Not all of them are good. I only have this is my podcast. It's just me. It's a one-man show. I only have on authors I want to have on. So for whatever it's worth, I like your writing.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
A lot of people aren't good. Yours is. I listened to it front to back, left a review. It's great.
Yeah.
For everybody listening, I highly recommend it. If you like any of the Cold War stuff I talk about, this is right up your alley. Be in the description, stick it in the top comment. Thank you so much, sir. I'll put your website as well in, and I'll link the Vietnam book, and I'll send you an email. I'd love to talk to you about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, look forward to it.
All
We'll
right, my
keep in
man.
touch.
Yes, sir. God bless, and thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, you too.